Hello folks, welcome back. I am the Sharply Dressed Man, and today we're talking more New World. Specifically, we'll be discussing the brand new bow artifact, the Boltcaster, from a PvE perspective, although I will be mentioning PvP at certain points during this guide. Real quickly, what is it? What is the Boltcaster? It is the brand new bow artifacts added in New World Season 4. Okay, so this is actually quite noteworthy because up until this point, there were no bow artifacts in New World. The closest that you could get is the Void Gauntlet artifact, Life Taker, which you would use in your offhand along with the bow to apply both a debuff that deals damage over time and provides up to 30% rend, which is an armor shred, on your targets. So in this case, now we have an actual artifact bow, which is quite exciting. So we're going to explore. So we're going to take some time to explore it today. First of all, let's cover the real basics. Where do you get it? Right? Like, it doesn't drop from dungeons, so there's no expedition farming, which is fantastic. You don't have to wait for a mutated dungeon to come around so that you can actually farm it. It drops in the open world. Specifically, it drops in the Elysian Wild on the Isle of Zervin. And it drops from a monster named Annoyed Aguacia, which spawns after you kill the gorilla boss Pugnacious Purutu. Right? And luckily enough, Pugnacious Purutu also drops the Life Taker. So it's very easy to farm both the Life Taker and the Boltcaster at the same time. When you're farming one, you're automatically farming the other. So when you kill Pugnacious Purutu, 3 other gorilla monsters will spawn. One that's fire aligned, one that's ice aligned, one that's lightning aligned. Kill all 3, and you'll eventually get your Boltcaster. It took me about 4 times to kill and get the Boltcaster, and the spawn rate is about 6 minutes. So yeah, it's a pretty decent amount of invested time to get it. What perks does it have? Alright, so as we all know, each artifact has its own unique perks, along with a couple of more thematically aligned perks. So right off the bat, I think the most important thing to discuss here is Electrified. So this weapon converts 99% of damage to lightning. So it's worth noting that this is just direct damage dealt by the bow. This does not apply to damage over time. So, for instance, your poison shot still deals poison damage, your rain of arrows still deals bleed damage, but your basic attacks and all of your direct hits from those abilities now deal lightning damage. And it also has the benefit of lightning damage from basic attacks deals an additional 20%. This is pretty big. We'll discuss that in more detail later, but this applies to both light and heavy basic attacks. Does not apply to Rapid Shot. It comes with Shirking Lightning. This is a pretty basic perk that adds an additional 45% damage to the next attack following a dodged attack. Right? So it's every now and then you get some extra damage, which is nice. It's not what I would call a staple, but it's a good benefit. It comes with Enchanted. Classic 5% extra damage to basic attacks. Alright, you should be starting to see a theme here. It comes with Bolt. Alright, so this is where I think a lot of the controversy comes from surrounding this weapon. Prior to the actual launch of Season 4, Bolt had the effect of every time you attacked something at max HP, it would stun the target for half a second. That has been replaced. That is no longer the case. Bolt now does the following. Basic attacks apply 1 stack of Static Shock. Static Shock does nothing by itself. This is a debuff that lasts 3 seconds and stacks 3 times. On the 4th application, so when you attack a target that has 3 stacks of Static Shock with a basic attack, it deals an additional 80% damage. So there's a couple implications from this. This means that this bow, this weapon, focuses primarily on basic attacks. And you must be basic attacking the same target regularly. Because if you let static shock fall off, then you just lost that 80% extra damage, right? Only lasts for 3 seconds, so you have to be very careful with this debuff when you're using the Boltcaster. And we'll go into more details about how to effectively manage this debuff later. It also comes with one craftable perk. The only noteworthy thing here is that you cannot use gem setting pins. Alright, this weapon cannot have a gem socket. It makes up for it, kind of, with the 20% additional damage to basic attacks, but that means you lose out on having Copperstein diamonds, your opals, anything else. Cannot have a gem socket. Alright. And again, just like all other artifacts, it comes with a set of quests that you have to go through to unlock all of these perks. And we'll just go through them real quickly. There are ice mammoths you need to kill in Elysian Wild. These are elite ice mammoths in the southern part of the area. Very quickly, we'll just go over and show you. So this is the area, Dredged Landing. They spawn right around here. There's about 4 of them. So the only thing to note here is that, be very careful. This area is full of elites. So just take your time. You need to kill 3 of them. You need to kill ice wolves. These are easy, because these spawn right outside of the Glacial Tarn, which is the new expedition. So there's 4 or 5 of them that spawn outside the Glacial Tarn. Just spend some time there, and you'll have that in no time. You also have to kill ancients inside the Glacial Tarn. Do the Glacial Tarn once, and you'll get knocked out. And then finally, you have the good old improve this weapon at the Gypsum Kiln, right? To unlock the 1 craftable slot on the weapon. We'll go into which perks I recommend in just a moment. All right, so let's talk about builds. If you want to use this weapon in PvE, we're going to talk about it from a PvE perspective. What should you keep an eye out for? Okay, so there's a couple things that we need to really just talk about before we get into it. This weapon focuses primarily on hard-hitting basic attacks and is inherently single target. Due to the way that Bolt functions and the fact that you'll be doing a lot of single attacks, light and heavy basic attacks, it is inherently single target, right? So keep that in mind when you're using this weapon. Solely lightning damage. Now, while you can do poison damage with poison shot, physical damage with the rain of arrows, most of your weapon damage is still going to be lightning. So you need to keep that in mind. And this obviously means it works best against ancients. Which isn't to say it's bad against everything else, it just works best against ancients. Okay, so let's talk about gear for a second. I would say that you typically want to start with a base of your typical bow build gear. Dex focus. You can check out my my gearing video if you want to see a bit more on this. I'm just going to highlight a couple things that you should be keeping in mind to maximize your damage with the Boltcaster. And that is, keep an eye out for electrified rune glass. This can get you 2% extra lightning damage up to a total of 10%. Right? But keep in mind, you don't want to go too ham, because you'll be replacing the gems in your primary gear with rune glasses, and you will need resistances for M3s. Still very important for M3. So you're making that trade-off between resistance and extra damage. So don't go too ham, or do. Lightning harnessing. This is a perk on left side gear, left side armor, that is 2% extra lightning damage up to 10% if you do it on all 5 pieces. And lightning damage, this is on rings. This is 7.1% extra damage. Now, as you can see, this is a lot of extra damage, right? So if you're talking about, like, say, a physical, regular bow, the best that you're going to get is thrust damage on your ring and ranged damage on your rune glasses. So we've got an extra 27% damage that we can deal if we're geared correctly with this weapon, which is quite good. Now, keep in mind, again, inherently single target, right? Good for bosses, good for things with lots of hit points, but you can get some pretty serious bonus damage if you gear for it. Stats. Let's talk about stats for just a second. Okay, there's something that you need to keep in mind when you're using this weapon. Now, I just said you can gear for this, and you get a lot of extra damage that you normally wouldn't get with a standard bow that deals physical or thrust. But here's the drawbacks. The 25, 50, and 100 strength bonuses do not apply to this bow. That is to say, the light attack bonus damage, the heavy attack bonus damage, and the 100 strength, which increases your physical damage, obviously, do not apply. This appears to be bugged, at least for me, for the 25 and 50. I would expect light attacks and heavy attacks, regardless of whether or not they are lightning damage, to benefit from having some strength applied. But regardless, strength doesn't have any effect. The 100 and 150 int bonuses do not apply to this bow. These also seem bugged because they apply specifically to elemental damage. So, again, if you have a light attack that deals elemental damage, I would expect these to apply. I don't know if they're going to fix it or if this is intentional or not. I'm just letting you know, right now, they do not work. So what does that mean? Well, that means you can put a lot of points into dex. So here's what I'm currently using for PvE with this weapon. Currently using 15 strength, 500 dex, 50 int. Remember, the 50 int bonus is extra damage to targets with a debuff, or damage over time. 15 focus, and 55 con. Puts me over 100 con when I use food. Right? So, there you go. Take a look at that. Hopefully that gives you a good place to start. Lots of dex. Weapon spec. Okay, so this weapon focuses on basic attacks, right? Basic attacks. Which means that talents like Aim True, which is 10% additional heavy attack damage, become very useful. So make sure that you're taking a look at your build. Make sure that you're actually picking all of the talents that increase your basic attack damage. Play around static shock. This is important. What do I mean by this? Okay, so let's review what static shock is. It's a debuff with a 3-second duration. Stacks to 3 times. On the 4th hit, deals 80% additional damage. This means that every 4 attacks equals 4.8 attacks. Right? It's not bad. It's not a bad bonus. But it's another way to think about it is it's like a harder hitting conditional lightning attunements. If you want to think about it like that. But what does this mean? Well, you have a few restrictions in your gameplay. Let's see. Penetrating shot. Basically, any abilities that are just attacks with your bow are recommended. So penetrating shot, poison shots, explosive shots, things like this. Things that can easily be woven into your basic attacks, make really good abilities for this weapon. The things that might be a little bit more risky, Rain of Arrows. Rain of Arrows is risky because it has a really long windup, a very long animation, which means that unless you're very careful with static shock, it might fall off of your target. All right, so be careful with this. What you do not want to use, avoid. Kind of sucks to say this, rapid shot. Why do I say this? Rapid shot causes static shock to fall off the target. You cannot use rapid shot. No matter how fast you are, you cannot apply static shock, use rapid shot, and then do another basic attack in time for it to re-up the debuff. So every time you use rapid shot, you're guaranteeing that static shock is going to fall off your target. So either use rapid shot only when you have 0 debuffs up, so you have to keep track of how many stacks you've got, and only use it when you've got 0 stacks of static shock, or just avoid it altogether. Which is unfortunate because of how powerful rapid shot is, and the lower 50% of, you know, the hit point pools for bosses and things with larger HP. Depending on your playstyle, this actually might be a case in which you might want to take concussion over evasive tactics. This is 20% headshot damage versus 15% damage after dodge. Right? So it depends. Like I said, huge amounts of basic attacks for this weapon. So you're constantly left clicking. And who knows? You know, if you hit a lot of headshots, then great. You're going to get a lot of benefit out of concussion. 15% with damage with the evasive tactics means you're also getting damage in your dots. But depending on your build, you may or may not be focusing on dot damage. So just keep that in mind. Okay, and then recommended crafted perks for this. Let's talk about the final thing for the build. Recommended crafted perks. Remember, again, basic attacks, lean into this. So lean into basic attacks. Single target. What does that mean? It means we should take a look at things like Vorpal. We should take a look at things like Keenly Jagged. Right? In this case, I'd probably lean towards Vorpal, even though hitting headshots can sometimes be very tricky. But I think either of these are going to be fine. They're going to really lean into the single target aspect of the bow. Other things that might be also useful depending on your playstyle, Keenly Empowered, which is what I use. But I probably want to go back and try out Vorpal just to see, because I'm thinking that one of the main things that this bow does is it gives you the ability to like really stack up really big 5-digit headshots. So there you go. Those are my recommendations for how to build, right? Gear, stats, spec, crafted perks. The big thing to take away from here is rapid shot causes static shock to fall off. How do you use this in combat? I think this is pretty basic. We've kind of touched on this throughout the rest of the build. Focus on basic attacks. Play around static shock. Weave basic attacks between your abilities, as to say, never use back-to-back abilities with this bow. Otherwise, static shock will fall off. Right? If you elect to use rapid shot, make sure you're using it 0 stacks with static shock, or just understand that whenever you use rapid shot, you're no longer taking advantage of that part of the bow. Right? Just keep that in mind. Most useful on ancients, and particularly, especially bosses and named enemies. Right? So, this bow really shines on things with really deep hit point pools, because you need to be able to plug something 4 times in order for you to proc static shock. And when does that happen? Bosses and named enemies. Alright? Not to say it's not useful on trash, but it's going to be less useful. Alright. So that's it. Let's talk about some final thoughts. So how does this bow rate? Well, let's talk about what are the positives and what are the drawbacks. Right? Let's discuss what it does well and the things that it does not do well. Things to keep in mind. I think one of the foremost positives for this bow is it frees up your second weapon to use a spear, rapier. It's much more flexible in that regard than the Life Taker. Right, much more flexible than the Life Taker, which uses up your offhand with the Void Gauntlet and forces you effectively to use nothing but the bow the entire time you're in a dungeon. There's a lot of potential here for large left clicks and 5 digits plus headshots, right? So if you really like seeing those big numbers, if you stack up all the bonuses for this bow, you're going to see some big numbers, all right? Guaranteed. You're going to see some big things happening with this bow, especially if you can land all of that extra lightning damage at the top. And if they actually elect to fix the stat bonuses for it, it's only going to get better after this, right? Lightning damage has a higher stack potential than thrust damage. We discussed that quite a bit. There's just more ways to stack lightning than thrust. This is absolutely a great weapon for ancient bosses and ancient dungeons in general, so keep an eye out for that. And real quickly about PvP, if you're in PvP, highly likely, many people just aren't using lightning resist. Right, which means your left clicks are going to just do more damage than they probably would if they're using thrust plus, say, nature. Right, I think nature is the primary, the meta right now for bows, so folks are stacking nature resist. Doing this, you avoid that altogether. Let's talk about the drawbacks. Requires a complete new set of gear to get the most out of this weapon, which can get very expensive. Right, so if you're talking about getting lightning harnessing on all 5 of your armor pieces, you're talking about getting a ring with lightning damage on it, you're talking about getting 5, potentially, rune glasses that have lightning damage. Yeah, you're going to get a lot of benefit, but at the same time, very expensive. So very few people, I think, are actually going to be able to make good use out of that. There's no gem socket. This is a huge drawback, which means that you lose 15% damage on anything that isn't a basic attack. Right? This is all of your specials. This is your DOT. Because you can't use diamonds, you can't use opals, you can't use anything else that improves all of your damage or basically gives you a flattened power, you lose all of that damage. You lose 15% damage in exchange for plus 20% damage on basic attacks. The unique perk is very difficult to use. I'm talking here about Bolt. I'm talking about Static Shock. Lightning damage applies to only basic attacks. Not only does it cause you to have to use an entirely different build, that's to say which talents you're using for your weapon, but you have to be very conscious about using them properly, right? Don't use specials twice in a row, otherwise your static shock drops off. Don't use rapid shot, otherwise static shock drops off. Which can be a pretty burdensome, I would say, for a lot of players versus another bow, which is just use abilities when they come up for the best benefit. Heavy single target focus. AoE suffers greatly. You still have access to usual AoE abilities like Poison Shot and Rain of Arrows, but they're riskier to use due to the nature of its perk, and they deal less damage because it lacks a gem slot. Can't effectively use a Rapid Shot. I love this ability, so I'm just going to put that in there again. Generally, I think this weapon loses to Life Taker. This is the bottom line. I think this weapon just loses to Life Taker, which provides an additional 300 to 500 damage DOT, and the biggest thing, up to 30% rend passively, and gives you access to a gem socket on your weapon. All right, and that's it. So in the general sense, I would say I would still recommend Life Taker, but if you're looking for a weapon that does big, has the potential to do big basic attack damage, and frees up your offhand or say a spear or another type of weapon provides a lot more flexibility, then you might want to check out the Boltcaster. There you go, folks. That is it. Bottom line, it's okay, but requires a lot of investment to get the most out of it. I still recommend the Life Taker for general use. Thank you so much. I'll see you all next time. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to put a comment, put a like, join the community in our Discord, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks very much. Take care. Goodbye.